Good morning students. Today I shall discuss a new topic, that is group or aggregate functions used in MySQL. MySQL provides a set of functions which works on a group of rows. But till now we have been discussing about those functions in MySQL which takes data of a single row as input and produce a given output based on the values of that row. Now, considering this highlighted section as a row, MySQL functions can take data of this row as inputs, such as the value S10 for SID, pendrive for dname, 5 for QTY, and the date 2013-9/5 for the column PUR date, and then produce an output based on the values of this row. Now, what if we wish to take data not from a single row, but if we wish to take data from multiple rows? Okay, if we wish to take data from multiple rows as input from a table, then in such cases MySQL shall take the help of the group or aggregate functions to do that. So using the MySQL aggregate functions, we shall be able to take data from each of the rows as inputs and then perform aggregation and produce a single output. Now, these are the list of aggregate functions available in MySQL. The first in the list is the sum function, which performs the summation or the addition of numeric values on a set of rows. The second one in the list is the count function, which counts the number of rows. The third in the list is the max function, which returns the maximum value from a given set of rows. The fourth in the list is the min function, which returns the minimum value from a given set of rows. And the fifth in the list is the average function, which calculates and returns the average of the numeric values from a given set of rows. Now see, if you look at each of these functions, they cannot be used in conjunction with the where clause. That's why in the next slide, using the aggregate function count, I can't use that in conjunction with the where clause. That's why the where clause is not shown here in this query. Same is the case with the sum aggregate function. Even this function cannot be used in conjunction with the where clause. That's why even in this query the where clause has not been shown here. Now, same applies for the min function, the max aggregate function, and the average aggregate function. All these three aggregate functions cannot be used in conjunction with the where clause. That's why you do not see the where clause appearing here in this SQL statement. Now I shall elaborately explain you each of these aggregate functions, that is sum, count, max, min, and average, from the next slide. Now in this slide, consider the table identified by the name purchase bearing the columns SID, dname, QTY, and PUR date. Based on this table, there is a question below which is asking us to write a query in MySQL to display the total number of students who have purchased the device from the store. Now the total number of students is represented by the column called SID, which denotes the student ID. Now the values for this column SID are S10, S20, S30, S40, where S40 is occurring twice. So there are duplicate entries of S40 for this column called SID. And since there are duplicate entries of S40, so this column is not the primary key column for the table purchase. So as a result, this table purchase does not contain any primary key. Now let me come to the point. The question says we are asked to display the total number of students who have purchased the device from this store. Now the total number of students can be identified by counting the distinct values of this SID column. Now the distinct values are S10, S20, S30, and S40, because if we take distinct values, we cannot take the duplicate entries. Now that S40 entry is occurring twice, we shall take only one entry of S40. So we write the query as select. Just before applying the aggregate function count, we use the distinct keyword on the column SID. Now if we select distinct SID from the table purchase, it will list the values S10, S20, S30, and S40. Now after applying the distinct keyword on the column called SID, if we use the aggregate function count, it will count the total number of values starting from S10, S20, S30 to S40. So it comes to 4. That's why you can see that the digit 4 appears in the output table. Now see, in the output table you can see the column name represented as total underscore student instead of count of distinct ID. This is because I have renamed this column, that is count of distinct SID, into total student, okay, so that in the output the column name becomes more clear and meaningful, and users can easily understand upon viewing it. But if we represent the column in the output table as count of distinct SID, so any user who will be watching this output will not be able to understand the meaning of the column name. So the best practice is to give a meaningful name if the column represented is not clear. Here in this case, just to make the column represented in the output as clear and meaningful, I have changed the column count of distinct SID into total student. That's why you can see the column name as total student in the output with the value 4. Now consider this table purchase again. Based on this table, again another query. The query says you are asked to display the total quantity of devices purchased in the store. Now note that you are asked to find the total quantity of devices. Now the quantity is represented by the QTY column in the purchase table, and the values under the QTY column are 5, 2, 3, 1 and 10. This shows that some of the students are buying the devices in bulk. The student with SID as S10 who is purchasing the device pen drive is buying 5 quantities of pen drive. In the same way, the student with SID as S20 is also buying the device pen drive, okay, and in 2 quantities. Okay, so these two students, S10 and S20 as SID, are buying the devices pen drive in bulk. And also there is another student with SID value as S40 who is buying the device CD-ROM not in bulk, because he is buying the CD-ROM only 1 quantity. Now if we wish to display the total quantity of devices purchased, we need to add up each of these values under the QTY column. So adding up 5 with 2, then with 3, 1 and 10 gives 5 plus 2 plus 3 plus 1 plus 10, which comes to 21. Okay, so if we select sum of QTY from the table purchase, this should show the column sum of QTY in the output table, okay, with the value 21. But now we have renamed the column sum of QTY as total QTY, okay, to make the column name look clear and meaningful in front of the user. So total underscore QTY represents the column sum of QTY, which actually finds the sum of each of the values in the column QTY, and that comes to 21. Now again we shall consider the same table purchase, and the question is asking us to write a query in MySQL to display the minimum quantity of devices purchased in the store. So if you are asked to display the minimum quantity of devices purchased, okay, we shall take this quantity column of the table purchase, and now from each of the values under the quantity column of the table purchase, the minimum value is 1. Okay, note that minimum means the smallest value, so smallest value under this QTY column is 1. Okay, so when we write the query as select min of QTY from the table purchase, it will return 1 in the output table, okay, under the min of QTY column. As a result, upon the execution of this query, that is select min of QTY from the table purchase, the output table shows the column min of QTY with a value 1. Now again we shall consider the same table purchase and read the question below. The question says write a query in MySQL to display the maximum quantity of devices purchased in the store, and for finding the maximum quantity of devices we shall consider the QTY column, and all the values inside this column called QTY. Now out of all these possible values, the maximum quantity of devices, okay, will be the largest value, which is 10. Okay, so 10 here represents the maximum quantity of devices purchased in the store, and this value is under the QTY column, or the quantity column of the table purchase. So for this question, that is, write a query in MySQL to display the maximum quantity of devices purchased in the store. Here is the query, that is, select max of QTY from the table purchase, and upon the execution of this query, the output table will show the column max of QTY with the value 10, okay, which represents the maximum quantity of devices purchased. Now we shall consider a different table, that is student underscore report. This table lists the marks of a particular student in every subject, that is sociology, pol science, English, economics and informatics. Now based on this table, there is a question below which is asking us to write a query in MySQL to display the average of the marks secured by the student in all the subjects. Okay, now if you are to find the average of the marks secured by the student, you have to consider this marks column, and all the entries of the marks column are 50, 70, 30 and the marks 40 occurring twice. So we have to add up each of the entries of the marks column, that is 50 plus 70 plus 30 plus 40 plus 40, and then divide by the total number, okay, which comes to 5, because if you count 50, 70, 30, 40 and 40, the total number comes to 5. Now let me show you how this is done. So at first, let me bring a text box here. This is only for you to understand, okay. So let me bring the text box here. So at first I add up 50 with 70, okay. At first let me add up 50 with 70, and then add up 70 with 30, then add 30 with 40, and again with 40. Okay, this gives, see, 50 plus 70 is how much? 120. 120 plus 30 is 150. 150 plus 40 is 190, and 190 plus 40 is 230. So the sum of each of the values, okay, under the marks column gives 230. Okay, and once we have found the sum of the values under the marks column, okay, which comes to 230, now we divide the sum by the total number. Okay, the total number for each of these sorry, the total number after counting the entries under the marks column shows 5, because 50 represents 1, 70 represents 2, 30 represents 3, 40 represents 4, and again 40 represents 5. So the total number of entries under the marks column is 5. So when we divide 230 by 5, we get the value as 46. So this 46 is the average value, okay, and this has been found by first adding up the entries or the values under the marks column and then dividing the total by the number, okay, dividing the total by the number, and that number is 5, which is the count of the total number of entries under the marks column. Now let me repeat what I have said. We have found the average by first adding the entries under the marks column of the table student report, and then after adding the entries under the marks column, we have divided the total by the count of the total entries under the marks column. And since the count of the total entries under the marks column is 5, since there are 5 entries, that's why we divide the sum 230 by 5, and the result comes to 46, which is the average. Now note that slash here denotes division, because the because the computer understands slash symbol as a division. Now let me note here, slash in computer denotes division. Okay, so I hope you understood how the average has been found for the values associated with the particular column called marks of the table student report. Now the same thing, okay, that has been done manually to get the output 46 in the output table has to be represented using an SQL statement, and we write the SQL statement as select using the aggregate function average on the column called marks. Okay, we write select average of marks from the table student report, okay, which directly shows the value 46 in the output table instead of the step-by-step representation which I have shown. Now this was just for you to understand how the average has been calculated, but as of now I will just delete it. This is because the computer will do that calculation in its processor, okay, and once the computer does the calculation, finds the average in its processor, it directly shows the value 46 into the output. With this I end my presentation here, and that's all for today.